Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's panel discussion, Shaping Up Your Security Posture. I'm Michelle Smith, Director of Marketing at BARR Advisory, and today we are thrilled to have an amazing lineup of security experts on our panel, starting with Nick Santora, CEO of Curricula, Brad Thies, Founder and President of BARR Advisory, Larry Kinkaid, Senior Consultant at BARR Advisory, and representing BARR and Curricula's shared customer, Ceros, we have Chris Fornia, Security Engineer. So before we get started, we wanted to send out a very heartfelt thank you and shout out to any and all service members in attendance on what is Veterans Day today. And to those of you who will be watching on demand later, we sincerely thank you for your service. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, panelist, MC, Nick Santora. So take it away for us, Nick.
Awesome, thanks, Michelle. So, just to get to know everyone here, I wanted to kind of introduce, what we're talking about. So today's all about how do we shape up our security posture. So there's no real agenda. It's kind of a conversation around some things that we're going to call out the obvious. We're going to point out some things that we've all seen in the field from both the practitioner, advisory, and vendor point of view, and just kind of see where the combo flows. So why don't we start there, just from Chris, your experience kind of getting connected with this whole crew. Why don't you tell us about kind of your backstory, how you got connected with BARR and Curricula and everything in between?
Yeah, well, hey everyone, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm Chris Fornia. I'm a security engineer at Ceros, and I'm actually our sole security professional. We're a pretty fast growing startup. We're a really cool product. It's a web-based design platform. You can make some really cool interactive content. And when I joined, there wasn't any security person at the company, but luckily the company had already partnered with a couple cool services. The first one was BARR Advisory, and through them we got the Curricula platform. And so I kind of joked that I didn't choose BARR and Curricula, but I inherited a really great family in it, and it made for a really soft landing. I've joined a couple other startups as the first security professional, and I would say that the easiest landing I've had was coming in here at Ceros, and that was due in large part to the work that BARR had done, putting together our security committee and putting really great documentation and infrastructure in place, for me to inherit, and Curricula was great too, because I came in and there was already sort of this lighthearted but serious spirit about security. And I think part of that is the trainings they did were engaging and kind of cute in a way that allowed them to sort of own security and have fun with it. And so, when I came in, it was really great to see, to see our team members already taking it in. I think the best example is that we have a coworker named Josh, and he's not in security, he's not even in engineering, but he made his Slack profile Josh, the pop star, and changed his name to that, and we all call him Josh. And I think it speaks to the great spirit of adoption that we have at Ceros in terms of security.
It's awesome. So we were all connected unintentionally, but we're here today talking about all things security. So Larry and Brad, why don't you give us kind of your background for those that don't know you or haven't met you yet?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Larry Kinkaid, as I think Michelle mentioned, senior consultant here at BARR. I've been with the firm over a year, but 7+ years in just compliance analyst security role. And throughout my career, security awareness training, I've seen various levels of maturity, whether that's recording a presentation and then providing that, and then a Google form to facilitate the quizzes. So when I joined BARR and finding something like Curricula, it was definitely a lot nicer and help facilitate the training in a lot better ways, more useful, I would say. Even though presentations or free trainings meet the spirit of SOC 2, it was nice to be able to have a content that you can actually cater to your organization.
Thanks, Larry. And so I work with Larry as well, and I'm principal at BARR Advisory, and we're on a mission to simplify the path to security and compliance. So that's why through partnerships like Curricula and others, and we help really enable that. And my role is really just to lead our organization through this mission, We do that through compliance and audit type services such as ISO, SOC, HIPAA, High Trust, et cetera, and the rest of the alphabet soup out there from a reporting framework standpoint. So happy to dig into some of that today. Where we help Ceros, though, and some other clients where we're really using the Curricula platform from a partnership perspective is really on our CISO practice that is supporting these innovative tech and healthcare and very regulated industries, organizations really help to build out their cybersecurity programs. So I'll be really on the panel today, really speaking from that lens of refining cybersecurity, really as we're, from our experience, standing up these programs and hopefully creating soft landings, as Chris alluded to when he joined Ceros.
Awesome. And for myself, I founded Curricula almost 7 years ago, and we try to make security awareness fun. So there's lots to talk about there, but why don't we try to start with some of the nitty gritty, right? Brad, we did a webinar, it seems like it was this year, but I'm losing track of time, about security doesn't equal compliance and all these other things where compliance doesn't equal security. So let's talk about that. So why compliance is getting very difficult, right? For small and growing organizations to figure out how to manage. Why does this phrase keep getting brought up? Compliance doesn't equal security, and everything in between.
Well, I think there's just so many transactions out there, and especially when you get into the sales world, you're just trying to reduce friction and in the sales cycle, and you get quite a bit of requests that are very focused. They say security, but they're very focused on compliance. And so that ends up being the target, is let's just comply with something, whether it's SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO, and that becomes the culture essentially, is we're doing this to comply with something versus then thinking about it as that's really the minimum bar, and not knocking compliance, because I think compliance is an excellent gateway, especially for folks that maybe don't have a lot of experience in cybersecurity. Compliance is good for that gateway kind of into the field. It's also a good way to translate and communicate to external parties, and having that standard to say, hey, we meet this standard at the very minimum, and it's a way to communicate and speak the same language, but that's not where you stop. So that's where, if you're thinking about like the evolving threat model, you really have to have that security-minded approach to it. So I don't think compliance equals security, but security can equal compliance. And so if you're thinking as compliance as the baseline, and you're always iterating and improving upon that compliance posture, then you really get to true security, where you can address the different evolving threat models that these compliance frameworks really don't get that prescriptive into. An example is a lot of frameworks just say you got to have a password. That really doesn't cut it these days. There are some evolving standards that talk about multi-factor authentication, but really most frameworks just say you got to have a password. And when 8 out of 10 hacks essentially come from compromised credentials, you probably want to have more than just a password, as an example. And that's what I mean by compliance does not always equal security at the end of the day.
So Chris, on your end, you've been a practitioner through a bunch of different adventures, let's call them. What's been your kind of taste or approach or experience with this conversation?
Yeah. So especially being the only security person, a lot of times the battles I've had to fight is that just because we're compliant does not mean that we're secure. A lot of, or I shouldn't say a lot, but I've definitely run into the executives or the more business-minded folks that might be overseeing a technology program, and they think that once you check those boxes that you're done, essentially, and that, once you get your SOC 2, that you don't have to worry about it anymore. And I definitely think that building out a strong security posture often means that you are compliant, but it's definitely not the other way around. I would not feel comfortable. I wouldn't feel done at the end of the day just because we have our SOC 2. I feel done at the end of the day when we cover a lot more bases than that, and we think more creatively and more in depth than that. SOC 2 is I do think that it's important, and when I see an organization has it, I do feel more confident. But I think of it more as a sales enablement mechanism and as a framework to start thinking about things, as opposed to a finish line. It's a really great kicking off point.
I'm gonna lean on this SOC 2 convo for a second here. So a funny post I saw on LinkedIn, and I don't know if it was true or just banter about this, but some sales rep was having a conversation with a CISO, and they asked for their SOC 2, and they said absolutely, and then the sales rep sent them AWS's SOC 2 report. So here you go, you're good. And they go, no, 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 yeah, like I don't care, like this is clearly public, we know who they are, but we need yours. They said, no, 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 we're good. We gave you Amazon, we use Amazon. And I think that goes back to what you said, Brad, earlier, is just that the kind of the friction, right, that's happening is like everyone's just trying to eliminate friction regardless of the consequences for that. And clearly the CISO pointed that out and said, yep, not gonna work with this company, because not only are they endorsing that, they have no idea what they're doing, they're trying to just kind of like wiggle through the process. Have you seen any, for you guys that deal with this all the time, have you seen silly things like this happening or kind of a lot of confusion in this space?
Definitely. It's funny you say that, because I actually recently had that same scenario unfold, in which, you know, I looked at it as a teaching moment, like, hey, you know, like, let's educate this person on why that isn't an acceptable answer. And that I think the concept of being SOC 2 certified is often also misrepresented and misunderstood as well. So yeah, I couldn't help but laugh at that.
The scope is sometimes off as well. I mean, you can check the box of any framework out there, and it can be extremely narrow scope. We review a lot of those reports, and there's been several occasions where we look at it and say, well, that's not even the product we're using that you're providing it to us. So you know, that's another piece why it's like, you know, the transactional element, it's that relationship is, you know, you have this transaction and you just want to check the box to move to the next piece. But, you know, that technical debt, you know, if you're in the software industry, you're familiar with technical debt. It adds up if you just think of this as check the box type stuff.
And I think kind of, you know, the using these moments to educate, I think this is kind of the big thing, right? Is we're all moving really fast. And if you think of any high growth SaaS company or growing business, you know, everyone just wants marketing and sales, right? We just want to do good and make more money and grow and grow and grow and grow. And the tech debt, not only on the product side, but also on the security and process and personnel side, also grows with it. And if and when we ignore that, there's consequences to that. And I think there's what we see, and I'm sure you guys are seeing it too, is that SOC 2 has become just red alert, right? Everyone do it. The whole world is now notified that they should be doing this, which I think is a good thing, right? It's getting people to bake in security and build a security program from, I wouldn't say day one, but maybe day 3 in their organizations. And but with that comes a lot of education. And I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of let's go as fast as humanly possible to just say that we have this piece of paper without understanding what this whole framework was designed for. Is that something that, I guess, Chris, in your experience being part of a lot of these compliance programs, that there's kind of like the do and not look back, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is that. And it's really dangerous because especially when you're growing fast, you want to, you know, add more features to your product. And that can be, you know, building on a tiny foundation. And when that foundation cracks, the whole thing topples. So you need to make sure you start with a strong foundation. I do actually think that SOC 2 or, you know, ISO, some of those different frameworks are a great way to start building strong. If you continue to, you know, if you have it equal laterally speaking, then it can be okay. But yes, move fast and break things can often mean ignore security, or like you said, or like Brad said earlier, you know, the scope of whatever you have certified to be good is so small, and your offering is so big that it's not. In reality, you're not. You know, you're not compliant. You might have that checkbox, but you're not compliant when you're just leaving things out of scope. And I have definitely seen that before. And while it makes me cringe, it also means I still have a job. So, you know, so I suppose we're all a work in progress, right?
Yeah, I'll add to that, because you know, there's a positive side of the story as well. We've worked with several clients that did not have the mindset that, hey, the bar is SOC 2 and then we're done. And this was a startup, and they were doing business with the enterprise, and we discussed with them that, hey, this is good enough to kind of get through this baseline, but here's some recommendations on things like how you encrypt your data, how you make sure you only have the information that you need, and things like tokenization, some of the technical controls that help reduce that scope a little bit more in terms of your attack surface. And they said, man, that's a lot of work, but because of the types of information we have and the businesses that we're working in, we're going to start now and thinking about that stuff. It's not like we're going to address it today, but we're going to start now and put that in a roadmap. And they eventually got it together within the next year. And sure enough, they were working with a large enterprise contract that helped them get the deal across the finish line. It wasn't the SOC 2, it was the fact that they really thought through how they inventory their information, how they do tokenization, how they're making sure they only have access to what they need. And that led to a significant multi-million-dollar deal for a startup, which was all due to differentiating themselves with using security in the marketplace.
So it's kind of all, walk the walk, talk the talk when it comes to security game, is that if you're just putting some stuff down on a piece of paper or getting through a process, it doesn't necessarily mean that you understand it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So with all of this stuff, right, for anyone listening and you're going through some type of compliance or, and starting to build or bake in a security program, there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of ground to cover. And when we look at kind of all that ground to cover, right, when building out any security program, there's this evolution of process, people, technology that are involved in every stage. And I always am a big advocate for following them in that order of process comes first, because you got to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Then you try to put some people in to see if it's possible to follow that. And then you got technologies that change constantly, right? You're always going to come in and change a technology no matter what. It's just we're in a world where there's just too much new shiny things for that not to happen. So, when have you seen that fail in your experience, guys? I mean, with people just kind of praying and hoping for a technology or something to fill the gap for them, what's your experience with a good or bad story with that?
Well, what I've seen every time, so I've joined 3 startups, as the first security focused employee. And every time I see that in terms of testing tools, people install testing tools, and no matter how they configure it, they think because it's installed that it's okay, and we're scanning our stuff now, so it must be all right. And so that's a really great process, but maybe the people in technology are failing there, because what you need is the people that can learn to correctly configure and point the testing at the correct resources and at the right intervals, and know what to do with the information once they find it. And so that is that's a great example that I've found that it fails. But those very same tools are absolutely essential to standing up a good security posture. And once you have them configured correctly, they're a great technology. And if you have the right process, they're really really useful, and can give you some an extra hour of sleep each night.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great report. I recommend reading it. It highlights that fact that it's not just about technology. So yes, there's budgets now for cybersecurity. You don't really, 10 years ago, you didn't really, it was hard to get budgets sometime for cybersecurity because you can't really see the return on that investment right away. But it's really it's a budget item these days. Maybe there's some debate on how big it is, but it's no longer that much of a battle to get budget for these types of things. People know they need tools, but there's a lot of lemons out there in the marketplace, and that's not really because these products and tools are bad. I think it's just not being able to educate folks in the marketplace. And there's a great report by Debate Security, and it's called "Is Cybersecurity the New Market for Lemons?" Because there's more budget, but there's also been a lot more breaches and issues that you see on the news every day, and that's backed by the data. There's more budget, yet there's exponentially more issues happening, and part of that is the educating that these tools, there's more to it. You have to have the people and the process around it to make sure you're using these types of tools effectively. So if you have a tool that shows up, you plug it in, and it says you're SOC 2 compliant, There's a lot of things maybe under the hood that you really have to understand how that's working before you can sign off as an executive saying that you're ready for an audit or you're ready for the next hacker to come into your environment. You really have to make sure that you're scoping it right and you know what that tool's doing for you.
And I'll add too. I mean, I think the consensus here is people is the most important, probably why it should come first. I guess like with Ceros and my relationship with them, we have a weekly meeting, and not only are we going through like just like the list items of like talking through various scenarios and the to-do list, but towards the end we always have kind of like an open table in which we support just open dialogue on like, hey, I was thinking about this may not be configured correctly, or we may not be thinking about this correctly. And that open dialogue is definitely a tone from the top. And then the fact that leadership supports like security and takes responsibility over it beyond compliance. So I think that that's really helpful, and that's where people come in as well. You can come in, anybody, a single resource can come in, and if they're the sole person responsible for security, it's almost impossible to get anything done.
Let's talk about that, leadership and tone at the top and tone at the bottom and tone in between. And how do we talk about this? So, a lot of security and just business in general is built on trust, right? Trust with relationships internally, externally, with vendors, partners, et cetera. And now you're putting in security into that equation. And I think, realistically, and I think you guys would agree with me, SOC 2 and all of these other compliance requirements are all about building trust amongst these communities of people. So that way we're not saying, yeah, we do that. Yeah, but check out it's no, someone came in and actually verified and validated that we're following those practices and endorsed us to say we're, going to put our stamp on that, saying we made sure that they're following those practices over a period of time and we believe they're doing the right thing. How the heck do you communicate that to an executive team that just doesn't care? Have you guys ever run into that before, where they're just like, get it done? And I don't really care too much. Has that ever been a conflict for you guys?
It has, and it doesn't end well. I don't think you convince, you shouldn't be in the business of trying to convince your executive team that cybersecurity is important. I mean, that's like these days, that's like convincing an executive that marketing is, having to say, hey, marketing as an organization is important, or sales is important. I mean, it's table stakes now. So if you're running across those situations, really it's just a matter of time before something bad does happen, that it's going to get that executive's attention. So I haven't run into it a whole lot where executives, don't care about it. They just don't necessarily know what to do. And so it's more about there's so much you can do. How do we move the needle forward just one step? And it starts with that accountability of who is accountable for cybersecurity in the organization. The short answer, it's everybody, but you have to have at least one person that is really driving the ship there when it comes to setting up these programs. And if that executive doesn't have that experience, they need to have somebody that hat or that seat is defined, just like you would define somebody owning the marketing seat or define an ownership of the engineering seat. You have to have somebody that has that responsibility and they're charged with it. So that's the very first step of moving the needle in the right direction. Then you can go from there. But if they still say they don't need that seat in the organization, then it's only a matter of time before something bad happens. So.
Yeah, and I would say I've definitely seen the direct aftermath. So the first startup I was with was called ID Watchdog, and we were acquired by Equifax just about 3 months before they announced their breach. And so we were kind of surprised by how intensely they were scrutinizing our security posture when they were in the process of acquiring us. And lo and behold, it's because they realized that for the prior 25, 30, 40 years that they had IT, they didn't care about security at all. And whoops, they gave away most of the country's social security numbers and addresses and phone numbers and stuff like that. So yeah, and being the first security person, I think I've been lucky because they hired me. So it means that they had made that decision to invest in security, and once they're willing to put their wallet on it, buck up for it, it probably means that they've also sort of adopted that security importance mentality. And yeah.
Maybe that's, the way to think about it more of, it's not that they don't care, it's that we haven't been really kind of translating it correctly for some of the executives, and we got to get them to see security as the same investments they're doing for the rest of their company and the same business practice ethics that they do for their company. So if you think of as a business, right, if you're working with an external party, you don't kind of boast that you're a liar. Like that's just not a thing that a lot, I mean, some companies probably do this, but most of the time you're trying to say, hey, we're trying to build a relationship, and you're talking about this as a trusted group of individuals trying to work with each other. We got to treat security in that same conversation. It's got to be part of it. We've got to be transparent about it, and we got to all speak the same lingo, because if we're not, then how the heck are we supposed to trust each other in any of the activities we're doing if we're relying on each other for doing business in the future?
Mm-hmm. I saw a comment in the chat box. I don't know if we want to address that now, Nick, or.
Yeah, sure.
So the question is, which one do you recommend for a company to create a posture? I'm assuming security posture. ISO 27001 or SOC 2. There's not a requirement for being certified. I'm just asking for having a posture. I'd be curious what others' thoughts are with that. My default recommendation is pick one and do it really well. It's pretty easy to map in across different requirements, but just for the sake of clarity in the organization, you just need to pick one and do it really well. And over time you might add on to that, but ISO and SOC 2 are very direct derivatives of each other. I don't think you can go wrong with either. ISO has a little bit more prescriptiveness and some guidance out there. SOC 2 is a little bit higher level. So I don't think you can go wrong with either, but just pick one and go with it. And that's the same case if you're thinking about NIST or CIS. The most common ones we see is either ISO, CIS, or NIST. It really depends upon if you're kind of dealing with a global standard, or if you like the CIS tools, they've got prescriptiveness all the way down to how to harden your AWS environment. And then you've got NIST, of course, which is speaking the language if you're in the government space. And so part of it's also just about what language you want to speak. What language do your customers speak as well? But either way, you can't go wrong with just doing one really well and then mapping it to crosswalk if you're trying to speak the language across different industries.
Definitely. And I'll add that starting with one, doing it really, really well, they are derivatives of each other. So like if you wanted to do both eventually, it is very natural and like, I guess, logical to do. So if, start with one and then you can work your way into the other one as well.
Yeah, and then I guess I have an opinion that one is better than the other, but they're better in different ways. So I would say that SOC 2 is easier. So let's say you have more constraint on your resources, you might want to, from my experience at least, you might want to try to tackle SOC 2 first. But at the same time, if you have a little bit more to invest in terms of time, and you want to be more secure, I feel like ISO, because of its, I think you called it prescriptive suggestions, can help you move further along and become have a better security posture. Just from my experience, I think that it gives you more in terms of solutions, and it gives you a little bit more granularity, which I appreciate. And especially, I mean, pretty much everyone's on the cloud now. I don't know if you have your own servers, I don't know what to tell you, but if you're in the cloud, I think ISO is a great move in the right direction, because you need to do more than that. But if you're looking to get better, that's what I would recommend.
So we talked about like picking a language and let's speak it, let's get good at it, right? So with employees, let's talk about speaking to them on the security lingo and language and complexity of what we're doing here as security professionals. So as an employee, right, in the past decade, there has been a lot of change across the board when it comes to security and regulations and privacy and compliance requirements and just anything under the sun. And that bar has lifted in the past year aggressively for everyone, more than I've ever seen in my entire career. So with that, how do we start baking in security into the conversation for employees as part of day one on their onboarding process and all the tools that they use? What's been your experience, both good and bad, on seeing that happen firsthand, guys?
Well,
I think Chris would be good to answer this because I really think that they've established that culture at their company. I think Chris might have a good perspective on this.
yeah, well, I think it comes from the top down. If you if your boss doesn't care about it, you probably won't care about it. And so you need executives, or if you're a really small company, you need every manager to express the importance of security. And it's tricky because that can become kind of like a heavy conversation, or like a crime and punishment, kind of thing where you're like, you don't do this and you're in trouble. But one great way to counterbalance that is to have kind of a fun security culture. And I think that's where Curricula fits in kind of perfectly, is that when you can speak about it in a lighthearted way, even though it's a really serious kind of thing, you can get ownership because people aren't scared. I don't think that it's as effective if you have people acting from a place of fear. So if you can get people to own the the security process as something that's fun or collaborative, they're going to be much more invested. And if you can get them to understand that caring about the company is caring about the security, because it can topple the whole organization if it goes wrong. Again, try to do that without scaring people, but if you can get that mindset in place, it's a lot more effective. And I think, as you mentioned, baking it in, I've heard baking it in a couple of times is a great way to do it. You need to build up with a mind of security. Adding security on top, adding that security icing on your cake is a very fragile defense.
And I think content really matters too, because like I've seen security awareness training programs where they just repeat the policies annually, year after year, which is good from an awareness standpoint and in the policies, but having like actual content that may apply not only to your professional, but also your personal life. Curricula is a great example with the smishing that just came out recently. I think that's even more so from a personal standpoint because it's happening on your personal devices. The company lacks visibility. Even with like MDM on iOS and the Android, you're still probably not going to have that visibility into the actual text messaging that happens there. And I can't tell you how many times Brad's asked for iTunes gift cards, and I keep giving them to him, but he just doesn't say anything back. I offer my Spotify account, and he just wants iTunes. So.
Yeah. Now I know. I haven't done any of those.
Yeah.
You've been hacked.
The culture stuff is important, right? And this is what we do. It's our bread and butter. We talk about it all the time. But you're right. Like, security has now become, if you think of just the past decade of evolution, where multi-factor didn't really exist in the masses a decade ago. It was just kind of used for big enterprises and small people and personal devices. Like no one cared. And now it's security by design, right? Every single thing is set up to start doing two-factor out of the gate and have this conversation that we're kind of used to it now. It's actually awkward to see someone not doing it in an enterprise, to the point of cringiness. Like, how are you still a company? How are you still alive at this point? And when we talk about culture, I think that it's softening the blow, right? It's having this conversation earlier, being transparent about, hey, we're here to actually put these tools and controls in place to help you, right? Like this stuff is for you, not for, the business is the business, but ultimately this stuff applies at home too. So, as part of onboarding processes, is there anything else that you guys have done or seen something unique where other security tools are kind of introduced at the beginning to an employee?
Yeah.
For us, it's
go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, for us, it's password managers at Ceros. That's something we push a lot that I actually hadn't seen in my previous roles. And now that I see it, I'm like, of course we should get everyone on that. I think it's common sense. And then when I see the company push it for companies to use and say, oh, also, by the way, maybe use it for your own passwords because it's great. I think that's an excellent example.
Yeah.
I think from just an encouraging culture is about, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, but also what doesn't get encouraged doesn't get done either. And so I've seen some success with just like some kudos channels and things like that for really encouraging folks to speak up if they see something or see an issue. And so it's almost like you've got that champion security committee or who owns that hat. And some of the most effective teams are folks that are not afraid to make mistakes. And it's just almost like bringing out that culture that, hey, let's just start communicating in companies. And here's a way, here's a place you can communicate any issue and just communicate that. I put in the link or in the Zoom chat something that helped me really think about the different types of clients that we work with and their culture. It's the competing security cultures framework, and there's different quadrants that you can look at it. There's the compliance culture, there's the autonomy culture, there's tight trust culture, and then there's process culture. And everybody, there's no right or wrong with that. I think when you've got the tighter compliance cultures like banks, there's more of a fear factor of it versus when you go to the lower left, that's kind of your startup, the trust culture, just focus on empowering people to do these things. And so I think look at that. That helps maybe as you're really thinking about your individual company, what does make the most sense? Because if you're at a bank and all of a sudden you just start trusting everybody, maybe there's, that might not jive well. So you got to maybe figure out which way you want to go, what culture you want to be, and then how to actually put some tools around that.
And I think it's really hard to measure culture. And I know, like, my example is like we did a phishing simulation with Ceros, and we look at like the statistics, but there's like got to be a story behind it as well. There's the I guess open dialogue within Slack, and I think within a couple hours we saw somebody post something within their Slack channel saying, "Hey, this doesn't look right," which then one could say, "Oh no, it's going to skew our numbers." But no, that's kind of organically the culture dealing with a legitimate, well, not a legitimate, but like a very reputable looking like phishing simulation. So I think that, like, the statistics of our phishing simulation, like, they're useful in a sense, but what was even more useful to me is the fact that, like, how fast that really came out and was the dialogue started around it.
It's awesome. Yeah, we're high advocates for that, of the stories behind the clicks and stories behind everything that's going on, because there's context that cannot be distributed on just a number on a dashboard. It's more about, well, how do we actually measure a culture, right? And that is more of a qualitative assessment of all the things that happen in a company. And your HR team doesn't have a dashboard that spits out numbers for stuff unless they do a climate survey or something like that. So they're like assessing the culture through lots of different interactions and conversations and behaviors amongst your community of people. And by the way, Chris, you're going to know there's a password manager episode coming out pretty soon here that's going to help with that convo. But what else on the culture side have you seen kind of, I guess, either correlate with HR or some things that you've seen, behaviors or actions other than those Slack channels that have said to you, like, hey, we're making a difference here?
I would say that just hearing people discuss it. Now, most of that in our company happens in Slack. That's where most of our conversations do happen. But seeing that increase in conversations is what is really like heartening and really gives me a good idea. I'm a huge numbers guy. I mean, whatever. I'm an engineer. That's kind of built into my DNA, I guess. And coming from a couple of pretty, I guess you'd call them more serious and more heavily regulated industries, everything was all about metrics. And so when I came here, our CTO actually told me, hey, I don't care about the metrics. We need to find another way to figure out what's going on. And so what he wants to see is engagement from our own employees. And the problem with security, I think, is that people are kind of scared or intimidated by the idea of security. They don't want to sound stupid. My first job way back in the day was at Comcast, and we get calls like, "Oh my God, my toaster was hacked," and people make fun of it, but at least that person is thinking about security and wants to find a solution. And so, just any kind of open dialogue and any kind of engagement is where we try to find it. And so, what I really find that to be is engagement being non-engineering people bringing up somewhat technical things, saying, hey, I think this doesn't look right, or I think I got hacked. We have some conversational Slack channels where we actually just see security subjects get brought up, through the news headlines. That's really encouraging to me. It means that it's on people's minds. And then, again, hearing executives that might not come from a technical or security background embrace it. That's another sort of non-metric that you can lean on to see that your security culture is growing and healthy.
Yeah, another sentiment to that, it takes typically 7 times for a message to really come across. You can't just put a policy together and expect that that's going to be followed by all at a company. And so the constant drumbeat of whether it's a cybersecurity policy or whether it's an initiative elsewhere, just like you have a some companies have quarterly meetings, and if you tend to really reiterate your core values, what you care about, what matters, reiterate, what you're doing for the next quarter. Same concept goes with cybersecurity. If you don't continue to message that, you can't just write it down in a policy and expect people to follow it. So kind of using that 7, have you communicated your what you want out of your cybersecurity program at least 7 times? Otherwise, the company is not going to understand it or follow it.
And I think to build off Chris's engagement from Ceros specifically, we've been talking a lot about shadow IT. It's in this day and age, it's very easy for an employee to take their processes into their own hands, to put down their company credit card and start a free trial and start putting whatever data they have access to within another solution. And the visibility is based on only so much, right? Unless I guess we get another tool to monitor shadow IT. That's a whole other story. But I have individuals reaching out to me pretty consistently saying, hey, Larry, what do I need to do here in order for us to get comfort around this before we even sign up for a trial? At what point do you need to get involved? So the fact that these individuals that are looking into these tools are reaching out to me proactively, I think is a testament to what we've been able to do at Ceros.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, sorry. And just to plug for Ceros, our first value is we give a shit. And it's been really great to see that carry into security too. If you ask people to care and view it as a caring issue, as a giving a shit about your company issue, I think that's a great way forward too.
And I think the theme of all this, right? It's a two-way street. And I think a lot of times when we think about employees or security or anything in between, it's just IT security pushing stuff down and no one ever gets to talk back. And if you talk back, you get scolded. And it's just, that cannot be, right? If we want to have a community of trust and a community of security that embraces everything you're doing for them instead of resenting you for it, then we got to have these two-way conversations. And we have to be willing to trust that not all those conversations are going to be easy. And I think that's why no one wants to have them, is because you say, I'm doing this for you. This is so important. I did it. I chose it. You have no choice in the matter. And it's like, well, what if 90% of your employees have a big issue with it because of something that you didn't know about? And you force something on them that they weren't really happy about. And then they start circumventing it. And then now you wind up with a joke of a security program because everyone's kind of looking at you as like, well, they don't really understand our business. They're just doing what they think is right. So definitely don't want to do that. I know we're coming up to our last couple minutes here. One thing that I wanted to ask you guys, what's the most absurd phishing email that you've ever personally been part of or seen in your lives?
So go, Chris.
Yeah. Okay. So one I got, it was like 5 years ago, but someone sort of intimated that they might be my child. And I'm a pretty responsible person. I just thought that was the most ridiculous thing I have heard. And my other thought was like, if they're trying it on me, it's probably like the 50th person they've tried it on. Has this worked on somebody? I hope not, but probably.
It wasn't a real phishing email, fortunately, but I was being onboarded as a security professional, and I got one that was related to like payroll. You need to finish off your payroll configurations and whatnot. And I'm thinking, that doesn't make any sense. But curiosity got the best of me, clicked into it, and of course, here's a security professional, getting like first day of the job. But then I thought about it, and I'm thinking, you know what? This is. I mean, it shows that I have training opportunities as well. There's. I think phishing is going to get, and as it already has shown, getting more and more realistic. It's past, the princes asking for cash to unlock millions of dollars. I think everybody has the opportunity to learn and be better about their IT health.
Yeah, I guess mine are all the Amazon gift cards that Larry's been purchasing of me asking. So most of the emails I get are, hey, Brad, look at this email that you apparently sent that's been spoofed. And, I just find it funny because we don't really communicate via email for sensitive stuff anymore. It's all through Slack. And so when those types of things come through, it's just kind of funny because nobody would ever ask for that stuff via email anymore, at least in our organization.
I've seen a couple good, lots of good ones in my career, but recently in the past couple of years, I got one from a random investor that I don't know, somehow I was on their email contacts list, and then I get a message saying, you got to click this, do this now. I was like, I haven't heard from this guy in 2 years. And looking into it, it's clearly phishing. And I wrote back, I was like, hey, someone just hacked your account. Like, gotta go change your password. And then the hacker's like, no, you change it. Thank you. And it's like, okay, they don't speak English very well, and they're actually talking to me right now. So I called him on the sideline. And this is also inspiration for one of our episodes. Like anything that happens, we just throw this stuff into real life concepts that get translated into some type of story or narrative. But I think, the principle here is that this happens to all of us, right? Every single one of us, including everyone here, can get duped. We can get tricked. We can have a bad day. We could be exhausted. And one of these things could work on us. These ones didn't. Clearly, we're sharing them, but we get sophisticated ones. Your employees get sophisticated ones at their knowledge level. So all we're trying to advocate for is that we got to be more transparent with employees. We got to lift the bar. We got to realize that, yeah, it's not the Nigerian print stuff. It's not the misspelled emails. Like, that's bogus, right? This is old school type of messages that we're talking about. We're talking about sophisticated stuff that's using the templates that are all widely available and the tools that are widely available to misuse to cause quite a bit of damage. So we can't ignore that anymore.
Yeah, and
so
I would just add that, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would just add that what Larry said, I think, is one of the most important things here. He mentioned he had an opportunity to learn too, even though he's being onboarded as a security professional. I think that, pretending like you know everything is the worst thing you could possibly do for security, and just owning that hackers are going to be smarter than you and you got to learn is the most important part. That learning mindset is what will keep you safe.
Yeah, the more you learn, the more you realize you didn't know. So you got to keep learning.
Got a reading rainbow quote I have in my head here. So what as we're wrapping up here, in the next 5 years, let's say, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for organizations, kind of small, growing, with not a lot of resources on their teams? What do you think is going to be like the big thing that they're struggling to accomplish?
I think it's cloud security issues, protecting your Amazon environment. Amazon account takeovers are getting more and more complicated, and as everybody jumps into AWS or whatever, Google Cloud, and especially with containerized environments, it's getting harder and harder to secure. So stick to your security pillar within that well-architected framework. Get to know that bottom to top, and that's probably the best thing you can do, and be willing to learn.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's if you guys are familiar with Gary McGraw, he published a great book. It was like 15 years ago, just called Software Security. And the 3 issues that he had were connectivity. There's more connectivity now. Another issue is extensibility, like how you extend just functionality across systems, and then just the complexity. More code equals more bugs, and more bugs equals more vulnerabilities, but actually at an exponential rate. I think those are the same 3 problems today, but really want to focus in on the extensibility, just all of the different APIs and connections that it really takes to run systems these days. All systems want to talk and connect to each other, and just making sure you're really understanding what systems you are talking to, and the open source aspect of it, that it's not just about you anymore. There's an entire ecosystem that you're dependent upon in the supply chain of serving your product. And so knowing what you're connecting in and out of is extremely important.
I think, building off of all of that, in addition to adding the nuance of privacy becoming more and more complicated, I think it's just going to continue to kind of build and gain momentum there.
I will sum up some of your phrases there. I think privacy, security, and everything in between is clearly going to be difficult. But I think if I were to take my approach on it, it's communication is going to be the big struggle here. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of stuff being introduced to companies very quickly, and they're growing fast. And there's a lot of employees. And when you think internally, right, it's all about let's communicate to work better together. Well, now we have to learn how to communicate about security better. And we have to learn to communicate security externally as well as we hope we can do internally. I truly see that as a struggle right now. And if we don't change directions, it's going to get a lot worse in the future. Very doom and gloom, but not all is bad, right? I think if we recognize a lot of these things, that's why we're here, right? Is we're building our communities together. We're having conversations like this to call out our faults, right? No one's immune to this stuff. Doesn't matter how big, how small you are, or what industry you are, no one's immune. So if we all kind of recognize that and we want to do better, then let's do better. Let's call each other out. Let's help each other and, you know, try to work towards a better future, because if we don't, then the future will paint itself, and it's not going in a good direction right now. Yeah,
I mean, I'm optimistic because the conversation seems to be shifting where it's not, you know, it's all, there's talk about data, but there's humans behind this information. And I think when you start shifting the conversations less about the tech and the data and actually understanding there's humans behind this information, that helps really collectively bring everybody on the same page, that there's actually a reason why we're doing this stuff. It's for each other. And it's no longer the us versus them or my contract versus the sales cycle. I like the conversation's been shifting, like, this is a problem. I don't care what company you're in, or if you're trying on the sell side or the buy side, we're both trying to solve that problem together. And I've seen that shifting conversation, which I think is going to be fantastic, of just the more sharing of information on how to address these complicated problems as they come up.
That's it. Community, right? So if you don't have one, build one. You have a bunch of people you can connect to here with each other, and we're all happy to help. So that is what we got for today. Thank you everyone for spending the time to chat about shaping up our security posture and building a culture. And until then, you can follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to anyone on this panel. I'm sure we'd all be happy to help in any way we can.
Thank you all.
Thanks guys.
Everyone.
Thanks, this was fun.